that? I have the button.
You got it.
up.
She is in the office.
Hold on. I gotta make sure I hit my button. Redoing. Yeah, we're good.
That was loud.
Are we up on the presentation?
The PowerPoint is showing, but the music stopped.
I did that on purpose. But okay,
Oh, okay.
perfect. Thank you. That's exactly what I'm looking for.
And
to know
it's not
what
the
is going on.
slideshow, it's just the editing version.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so we were at 105. Stephanie, great.
Just gonna juice up with some more coffee, which might be a problem, but we'll see how it goes here. Be a very fast presentation if I talk coffee speed.
So the recording is going, just so you know.
Okay.
All right. Do you want me to do your introductions?
Sure. Yep.
Sure. Okay. So thank you for joining us with this special workshop with Melanie Forstrom and Malinda Ware. My name is Annie Colonna, and I am part of the organizing team for this conference, made possible by Garnet Health, the Orange County Youth Bureau, and the Orange County Child Care Council. Before we begin, I would like to familiarize you briefly with the features here on Zoom. When you are not looking to say something at this meeting, we ask you to mute yourself to ensure optimal sound quality for all. You are welcome to leave your video on if you like. The video on, off, and the mute button can be found in the bottom of your screen as a mic or camera icon. If you have questions during the presentation, you can put those in the chat and we will be sure to respond there or during the interactive parts of the workshop. You can also show your appreciation or support of what you hear by using the emoji feature, which you should also be at the bottom of your screen. Lastly, depending on the device you are using to join us from, you can choose your view so you can see multiple people on your screen in gallery view, or you can choose just the speaker in speaker view. Finally, please be aware that this session will be recorded. Now it is my honor to introduce the workshop leaders, Melanie Forstrom and Malinda Ware.
Wonderful. Malinda,
Thank you, Annie.
a little intro of yourself.
Thank you, Annie. Again, some of you know me, some of you don't. My name is Malinda Ware. I am a program director at Cornell Cooperative Extension, Sullivan County. I run several programs and manage several grants through our cooperative system. I am also the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion facilitator for our statewide Cornell University. And this is a project that I'm very passionate about because I have about 35 plus years in youth development. I've worked at several nonprofits here. I'm a graduate of Mount St. Mary's College, Robin. I have an undergrad in integrated marketing and a master in business administration. And I'm looking forward to this program today because it is an anti-racist youth program that has been put together, and we are hoping that we can inspire others to grab some youth and create a cohort in your own area. And today we're hoping that we can present something to you that's fun, engaging, and inspiring to do with some community partners and youth to run some programs, some anti-racist programs. So we're going to tell you how we took some really important steps on how to move forward and give you some guidelines and some tips and maybe some tools to start your own cohort. Thank you. Melanie?
Sure thing. So I'm Melanie Forstrom. I work at Cornell Cooperative Extension of Ulster County, a little bit north. And I came to this work through a bunch of different areas. I actually studied languages in college and thought that my career would be an interpreter or a translator, and ended up just wanting to use my languages after school. And where I started my career was at Latin American Youth Center, where I worked with many homeless young people, many of whom had crossed the border expecting, supportive family members here, and that didn't happen, or had a number of experiences that led them to be in need of housing. I then from there moved on to some work in New York City public schools, mainly with older populations of youth that were struggling to graduate. I was working both in Upper Manhattan and Washington Heights, as well as in Brooklyn. And I just celebrated my 10-year anniversary with the work that I've been doing more upstate. And one of the big gaps there was in trying to attract audiences that 4-H has not historically served, or that have historically been excluded from 4-H programs. And so we'll talk a little bit about the context in one of our future slides, but that's me. And I did also, Malinda, want to just add, we had a really amazing co-creator for our facilitated guide, which we'll be sharing with anyone who's attending this session. And so Juan Carlos Pinheiro was another really important voice so I want to at least name him, and we'll talk a little bit about some of our other partners as well. So we also like to know about you and who's in the room, but before we do that, we first are going to start with the definition of anti-racism. So consider this a PSA. I can't help myself. I'm sorry, Malinda. Oftentimes we have way too crowded slides and we put up all these words and then we talk over ourselves and people's attention is competing for, should I be listening to you? Should I be reading your slides? My brain doesn't know what to do. So I'm going to just consider my PSA that most slides should not be more than 8 words. That is a research-based number. There are exceptions to that for definitions, but what I'm going to do is bring up the slide and let you all read the definition, and then we're going to have a discussion about it so that you don't have to be both listening to me and reading a slide. So let's read this definition, and I'm going to read it with you so I have a sense of how long that takes. So anybody have any questions about that definition of anti-racism? I think it's important to note that there is both a personal responsibility for anti-racist work as well as conscious and deliberate actions and collective actions. So personal responsibility leading to collective action is one of the ways that I really like thinking about anti-racism. So with that in mind, we did want to poll you all and see who are you in the room. So going to start, and this is a conscious choice. I'm going to start with a sort of ridiculous question, but I need to know, which food are you least likely to eat out of this group? So please take our poll and tell me if that poll is showing up. So which of these foods are you least likely to eat? I need to know if I'm with a bunch of eggplant haters or if maybe I'm with a bunch of cilantro haters. This presentation will be vastly different depending on the answers to this question. Excellent. It looks like we have everybody and we have a fairly consistent group. You're with me that you don't, yeah, it's the seafood. It's the seafood. It's the seafood that stresses me out the most too. Maybe not all seafood, but anchovies. So 4 out of 6 of us are not eating those anchovies. And then 2 out of the 6 of us are not eating oysters. I have to also share, I was on a hike this weekend in the Catskills where some person thought it was okay to bring oysters up to the top of a fire tower and then leave all their shells everywhere. I was like, do you think those are going to biodegrade? Do you know anything about shells? Like what in the, anyway, drove me crazy. Okay, perfect. So now the more serious question, I'm going to talk about why we structure things like this in a second as well. What best describes your experiences with anti-racism work and programs? this helps us to know how we should be pacing ourselves a bit and where we might need to spend more time. Great. One more person thinking about it, maybe. Give 3 more seconds and then I'm going to end it in any case. Okay, so it looks like we have a nice mix here, some very limited, some personal, and then some personal and community or group work. So we'll make sure to spend some time on our definitions. And please, if there's ever a term or anything that you don't understand, please do make sure to interrupt us. Both Malinda and I are not super formal presenters. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, Malinda. But if you have questions and you want to ask them in real time and it's interfering with you being able to understand something, please do make sure to pop right in. So, okay, so back to, so one thing that's framed very much like our youth anti-racism program. So we start with kind of debating often or conversations around things that have less consequence, like what your least favorite food is. And then we try to build trust throughout the program and getting into more and more heavy content areas and heavy content fields and having conversations about race across different racial identities. So in putting those polls together, I was explicit in the way that I was structuring that to really inform you, and you can read a lot more about this in the guide that we've put together. That was a very conscious choice of, getting people to disagree civilly about things that of little consequence, so that if there is disagreement later about things of much more consequence, we have a basis for how we're going to disagree with each other and how we're going to talk to each other. All right, let me come back to our slide. So with that, I'm getting us over to the workshop objectives. Malinda, maybe if I can remember to share my screen, which I'm doing right now, talking to myself. Great. And here we are.
Thank you, Melanie. You might want to do a slideshow. There you go. Thank you. So basically today we are going to go over Act for Change. And in that, Melanie just talked about anti-racism, but we're also going to define racism. We know that that's a scary word and a lot of people are very afraid of that because it brings up a lot of things. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today. We're going to show you how to approach it through what is Act for Change program? What is the Act for Change program? Why is it important? How it started and different things. And then we're going to say, why should we act for change? And then we're going to encourage, inspire you on how we as a collective group can act for change. So these are kind of the basics of what we're going to be covering today. We're going to really give you a peephole into how we did our programming with youth, and you'll get to see some of their faces. You'll get to see some of their interactions. And I hope you will take something away that will inspire you to act for change. Melanie?
Thank you.
So as we begin, I wanted to share this because this was kind of a last minute add-on, but I thought it was really important to show how we get and bring people into a space that's not comfortable, or a space that most people don't want to even know about. So I'm going to read this poem to you very slowly and methodically so that you will understand. But I want to highlight that in the Act for Change program, we encountered some very fabulous youth. And this poem was written by one of our Act for Change youth. So I thought it would be totally awesome to hear her expressions and to feel them as well. 10 and 2. Eyes peering outside. Keep your hands at 10 and 2. A shot and he flew. I said 10 and 2. It's unfortunate that he can't hear you. Somewhere his breaths are free, but here his breathing is slowed. 1, 2, 3. Here his breathing stopped, and that is the problem. Her name is Oluchi. I have no idea, Melanie, how to pronounce her last name. I would say Chunkawamika. But she's a wonderful student from Nassau County. Yes, we spread as far as Nassau County with the privilege of using Zoom. So our program was run through Zoom, and I was so proud of this young lady. She wrote this poem, and Melanie is going to elaborate a little bit more on what inspired Act for Change, so that you will even understand why she took the time out of her busy schedule to write a poem such as this. Next slide. So one constant since the beginning of time might be change. However, the fear of change is also constant. If a society or a country rejects change, there is no growth and no progress. The inability to change, progress, or grow can be signs of a crisis and a demand or call for action to define and address the problems head on. And it is my hope today that what we present to you will spark thoughts about the problem and how it can be addressed. And Melanie?
So let's talk about what problem we are addressing through this youth anti-racism program. And the problem, as I see it, is that we are continuing to address a white supremacist culture where those who have power hold on tightly to their power, and we are often fighting against structures of inequality. Our statistics around race are dire. They continue to be dire. If for those of you who were at the mental health panel that preceded this, I didn't think I needed to be explicit about how youth anti-racism programming applies to mental health, because there's so many ways in which it happened. One of the more startling statistics I heard from the mental health panel that preceded this was that young people under 13, Black young people under 13 are twice as likely to commit suicide as white young people under 13. And we're hearing that in this pandemic, 1 out of 5 young people is suffering from mental health issues, and that number also disproportionately is falling on those who have structurally been discriminated against and excluded. So I'd like to include this graphic. I don't know about you, but I've had some pretty uncomfortable conversations about race in my own family of late. And a lot of what I hear is, well, why can't Black people, just get over it? They've been free for quite a few years now. I don't understand why we're still talking about this. And so I like this graphic that I came up against recently. It says, just in case we need to periodically refresh people's memories about the history of this country, this is what it looks like for a Black person in this country, for an African-American person in this country. The very vast majority of their experience over the past few centuries has been slavery, with then some years of segregation, with very little progress, and only since 1954, arguably much later than that, even, it wasn't until 1965 that we had that we had the Voting Rights Act and a few more important things. And as we already know, statistically speaking, we have a lot of work to do. So this is the problem we are addressing. And I think for far too long, what we've heard, and I think where the murder of George Floyd really has provided a point of reckoning, is understanding that this isn't just a problem for Black people to be dealing with and addressing. This is a problem that affects all of us, and that all of us need to be involved in solving. So I heard a really clear and strong call after the murder of George Floyd of white people do something. So, and we're all socialized to be very bad about talking about race, especially across different racial lines. So the problem we're addressing is getting people to talk about race across racial lines and to do something to address the inequities that are very much still pervasive and persistent within our society.
And thank you, Melanie, for all the work you've done in putting your foot forward in this activism. So today, what we want to talk about in the fact that we understand what the problem is. I think most of us do understand what the problem is, and we are kind of demonstrating for you how we've been approaching our youth. But what is Act for Change? Throughout this conference, if many of you have gone to other ones, you've seen a video. We're going to look at that video one more time, but we want to show you how we got to that video. So Act for Change, the goal for Act for Change is to improve and scale up youth anti-racism programming and to encapsulate the materials in a living guide focused on peer learning. So throughout this process, you'll see what we've done to encourage, engage our youth to start their own peer-to-peer programming. Using tools and youth to adult partnership, we can inspire youth leaders to act for changing the unhealthy flow as we move towards a healthy, sustainable future. So our goal for Act for Change is to improve and scale up anti-racism programming. Melanie?
So let's talk about the gap that existed, because Malinda and I would have been, probably equally happy, maybe even more happy, would have had back a lot of life hours if we had had this awesome curriculum that was ready to go to deal or to have these conversations in informal settings where we're working with youth. But as we were starting to gear up after the murder of George Floyd, to do some work and to do, some scrutiny, not just organizationally, but down at the grassroots level, we did not find anything that was meeting our needs. So one of the first things I want to talk about is that many of my colleagues are still white in our system. And so I heard a lot of people who heard the call of white people do something, but didn't feel they were equipped to do something, didn't think they had, didn't think they were ready, needed more materials, needed more help to have some of these conversations with young people and across different racial lines. So that was the first thing we were seeing. We also, I've seen a lot of materials around equity, especially of late. There's a really great curriculum that's out of Maryland that I'd be happy to send around, that's around equity. But what it doesn't do is center racism, and especially anti-Black racism. And the reality in our country is that this is something we need to talk about explicitly and specifically. The youth themselves were very intersectional and will always bring that lens of intersectionality to, not always, our youth did bring the lens of intersectionality to this program. But at the end of the day, we really wanted to center and structure it around racism explicitly, not just around equity and every week popping into a different subject matter. And then finally, again, our context. So our context being that of an informal educational system. Many of the materials I was seeing were either for personal development, so how to personally, which is important. We saw that in our definition slide of anti-racism. It's important work, professional development, it's important work. Malinda is part of a statewide team who's doing a lot of really great work around that. But what it wasn't doing was providing materials for us to be working with our youth. So, and in the informal context, I also saw a lot of materials for parents to talk to their children, et cetera. But what I really was missing and wasn't seeing is how are we structuring a 12-week program roughly around this specific subject? So we got to work. And this is really our context, our timeline. That is Tyson, one of our graduates. I should mention we have 25 graduates of our program across 3 different cohorts, all of whom are amazing. So, and one thing I want to add too, just to be accountable for it and to own it, is that a lot of people have been murdered before George Floyd and have been murdered since George Floyd. It shouldn't have taken George Floyd. And I'm looking at myself in the mirror here and saying this. So I just want to say, I'm glad that we are going through a reckoning. It shouldn't have taken the particularly brutal, murder in the midst of a pandemic to have this reckoning. So there's plenty before this context that should have made action happen. I think about that a lot personally, but we're going to start in this particular context with the murder of George Floyd. And then in June 2020, our Cornell Cooperative Extension director issues his vision about having an anti-racist organization. In fall of 2020, I reached out to Malinda and said, hey, I've got a little bit of innovation grant money, my first round of innovation grant money that I'm looking to use. Will you work with me? I need somebody to be working with me that's representing, that knows her stuff, most importantly, and that we're finding ways to have this conversation with young people. She happily agreed. By January of 2021, I had applied for another innovation grant. I should mention budget here. It was about almost a $25,000 grant. It's mainly covered our staff time so that we can dedicate it to this program. Very little budget needed other than that, and I can talk about some of those items. And we were awarded that CCE Innovation Grant, which is coming to an end right now. One of the things we heard within that context is that we had a lot of Latina girls in our first cohort, and they did not feel that their experiences were being properly reflected, or that we had enough sort of tools to be working with people across other racial identities and not just Black or white racial identities. And so we hired a third facilitator, Juan Carlos Pinheiro, who helped represent another lens, another voice, and he was the co-developer of ultimately of our written facilitated guide. From there, we had our third cohort, which was actually the first one that we didn't facilitate directly. We had Cornell interns from Cornell, who were in fact working on who facilitated the summer cohort of young people. And that was a really important turning point for us, because we handed off the guide as it looked right then to them and said, hey, here's the guide, see if it works for you to be able to facilitate this program. And they were able to do it, which made us feel very good. This fall, we have not been directly running cohorts. We've been focusing on our train the trainers, such as this one today, because I'm hoping that we're training you with the vision that maybe you'll go out and run your own cohort or talk to somebody who might. I don't want to be shy about that, because I'm going to keep returning to that point. And really, we're trying to gear up for late winter, early spring. Some of you all running some cohorts and doing this work. And I am finding and thinking about ways that I would be able to support this work as well. So that is context. And let's see if my little clicky button's still working. Maybe. Okay. So I think I'm still talking. How am I still talking, Malinda? Also, by the way, if anybody has chats, Annie, that would also be a big help. I can't see the chat box very easily or clearly. So please just feel free to butt in if need be, and let me know if there's a question, or again, if anybody has questions as they come up, please do just chime in. So why Act for Change? It's a call to action. It's a grassroots solution to an intractable problem. And instead of a top-down approach of I'm giving you a formalized curriculum, it's really a facilitative approach. Malinda and I didn't sit in our cohorts as the experts. We were trying to draw the knowledge out of our young people. Oftentimes we were receiving as much education as we were giving. And all of that is a really important part of why the Act for Change program was born and has existed across these different 3 cohorts. So we're probably going to power through this break if you're all okay with that, because I don't all enough that I think our timing has been fine, and hopefully you just came back from a nice little lunch break. So I think, Malinda, we're going over to you for this slide.
Yes. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you for putting the Act for Change into context. And now we're going to get into more of the meat of why anti-racist programs are needed and necessary. But let's start with defining what racism is. What I want to do is I want to encourage or invite each of you to use your chat box right now and what you think racism is. What do you think that is? I want to, as I'm talking and speaking, I invite you again. It's an invitation and not a demand. But what do you think racism is? As I'm doing this youth development program, being one very different from my career and my path, this is not an easy definition. And I believe it's also a scary one for most people. There's a lot of fear in this work that is almost unnecessary, given that if you would really dive into it collectively, we can make some really good systemic changes. Thank you, Robin, for your different definition. She states here, systemic oppression by one group over the other. Very, very good. When you're dealing with young people, one thing that I have found in my experience is that's not a word that they're really familiar with. We're in an era now where our young people are like, what is racism? And I'll be transparent mostly with my own son, which is going to be 26 years old in January. And he just looks at it like, what is the big deal? You know, and he experienced a couple of bouts with racism, but he still did not understand the word racism itself. I think it's a scary word. That is something I would encourage when you go into this work, that maybe we find another word. And I've been kind of playing around with this in my circles and in talking to different youth development leaders and youth leaders in our communities, instructors, facilitators, that maybe that's a word we need to play with a little bit. So I do see that Sheena put judgment or discrimination against a person based on their race or ethnicity. Thank you. Sorry about that. But so when I look at racism, I look at a word and I look at the power of that word, and I look at how important it is for us to kind of break that word apart for young people to understand clearly what that is, and then bringing them into the environment of, you know, how can we start changing and dismantling this. But this right here today, I just wanted to talk about the word itself. And yes, you both are correct in defining this word, because we can pull it out of dictionaries and we can pull an example that defines the word. But I find that when we can define what it is, we can move towards developing a system for changing our future, right? And then I see Annie put oppression and discrimination combined, right? That is true. Every one of you are absolutely correct in defining what racism is. I have a definition here, and I found this to be a standard definition. It looks like Google agrees. It says racial prejudice and discrimination that are supported by institutional power and authority. And then it goes to the United States. In the United States, racism is based on the ideology of white supremacy and is used to the advantage of white people and disadvantage of people of color. And I'm telling you, if you were to read that to a group of young people, they would look at you like, what are you talking about? You know, they'll shy away from the fact that, you know, those are just words, and racism is something that nobody really understands, and unless you're going through it, or maybe it's a made up. It just depends on how you grew up in this country. And, you know, one thing I found is that our history is not as a matter of fact or filled with facts as much as we would like them to be. So in doing this work, I would encourage you to first do a lot of homework. And it's not easy having those conversations. It's not easy peeling back the pages of truth and accepting some truth. But in developing programs and also facilitating programs, we have to come with that, and that being the truth. Because one thing I found out also with young people, they will Google and they will research right in front of your face, and they really don't care about your feelings. They're like, that is not true. It is right here because Google said it, right? So I think this is why it's important to include your youth voice to lead the way as we dismantle this system, because we always say in youth development and youth leadership and community work that the youth are our future. So in order for us to have change happen, we have to start dismantling this. And who better to use than youth to educate them? In order for this to happen, in order for us to dismantle the system of oppression, we have to encourage action to stand up for what you believe. And in doing that, Melanie and myself, and I appreciate and I am very honored that she chose me to grab this mantle to say, you know what, I'm going to make the connection with my experience as an African-American woman in this country, dealing with racism, not understanding everything, and bridging that gap with my youth development background of many, many years of understanding the minds of youth and diving into it. I will say, and I'll be transparent about that, I believe now I'm aging out. So I'm being very appreciative of how this mantle is carried. I'm being very sensitive and very careful, as if I'm carrying a piece of glass. I want to make sure that the next person that handles this handles it with care, handles it with intention, because if this isn't done right, then we start all over again. This process just ends and begins all over again. So defining racism is key to understanding what tools are necessary to dismantle it. This is an anti-racism program. Act for Change is an anti-racism program. And early on, identifying prejudices, microaggressions, we learned this was a way to start the difficult conversation. So we started with a pilot program that we pretty much had very youth-led. The conversations were youth-led. We brought them into a room, into a space. And when I say room now, I am totally reflecting on Zoom. I'm talking about this Zoom space because this was a virtual program, and we let the youth lead it. And we had a lot of fun engaging them in this conversation that's very difficult, but we came up with some really awesome and creative ways to engage them. And we also allowed the youth to name the program. So we had to start somewhere. We started with absolutely no platform, no instruction, no curriculum, no direction. And we let the youth lead this. So for those of you that are in youth development and you believe in youth voice, Act for Change is a program for you, because this program was built on youth voice. It was developed and grew to Act for Change based on just conversations with young people about racism and their experiences. So the first part of our program was, we went through quite a few names, and it was quite interesting and fun to end up with Stand Up for Change. And it was a really awesome experience because they ended up coming to this because they want change. They understand change a lot better than racism. So Stand Up for Change is a pilot program that started. And today we want to share with you the first video. You guys saw Act for Change video culminating event through our spring program. But right now we want to take you back. We're going to rewind back on that timeline that Melanie presented to you. We want to show you our Stand Up for Change and the students and how they addressed stereotypes. So
I'm also going to, I'm going to say, I'm also going to put in a plug for you to be thinking about. I'm going to ask you all to get a little, maybe less camera shy and a little more interactive after the video. And I'm going to be asking you, what's a stereotype that people have had about you that was not true? So a stereotype about one of your identities that somebody had about you and that wasn't true. Because I think we need to think about this in our own context as well. So Malinda, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Do you have more you want to say there? I'm going to.
Nope. Go right into stereotypes. I think that's what you were just talking about. And then we'll show the video.
Hi, my name is Sanaa, and I wrote down a few common stereotypes about Black people. I just wrote these. It's going to be inverted, so you can't see. I'm sorry, but it says threats, rude, unemployed, disrespectful, and poor. I'm going to get these up because that is not true at all. A lot of the Black community are employed, so I don't believe that's true.
I am just a woman. I am a powerful woman. I'm a powerful woman because despite being told that I'm just a young girl and that I have no intuitions and no intelligence or strength, I have all those things and more than I'm expected to have.
Because of this program, I have learned more about systemic racism. One thing I liked about it is like there's all types of people in the group, like non-binary, Hispanic, like Black people, white people, and we're all like talking about the same thing.
And I really enjoyed being a part of this group because I love being educated, I love talking about it, and it's such an important issue in our world today, and it's a very safe place for all of us to be.
My name is Anais, and I'm very happy to be in this program because I know all of our voices as one will make a difference in this world.
And something I would do differently is stop putting white people in categories because I tend to do that as they do to Black people. I will stop calling them all racist, even if they voted for Trump. Bye.
Okay, I'm gonna also stop sharing for a second because I can't stand not seeing everybody. So I'm gonna go to our group view and just invite you to either chat in if you're super camera shy or there's a reason you can't be on camera, or to talk to us about why, what's the stereotype that somebody's had about one of your identity groups and how did you not fit that stereotype?
I'll go. So I'm bisexual, and a lot of people don't understand what bisexual means. Currently I live with a man, so they think, oh, well, that means you're straight, but no, I'm still, inside of me, I am still a bisexual woman. And that's a real big misconception in my community.
Yeah, it's a huge one. So many stereotypes that you hear about that community as well. Thank you for sharing. Nicole, you might have to introduce us to whatever cuteness is happening in underneath your picture too.
Hello.
Oh.
This is Dimitri. He's joining
Hi.
us.
Hi there.
I'm just back from parental leave, so still got work to
Totally
do.
missed that part of your life. So how awesome. That's wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Annie, for sharing that too. I'm still thinking.
Mhm.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sheena. I'll
Hi.
share. So one of the prejudice that I've experienced as a Black woman was that because I am very reserved and have a certain look about myself when I first meet someone, that I am the B word, when in fact, I'm very kind and caring, and I do not conform to that word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the double whammy of being a woman and a Black woman, right? And then all of the things that people put on those identities. Thank you for sharing, Sheena.
I know, so I work with teenagers now, and often they will think that I grew up wealthy. They'll just assume that, but I grew up in a trailer park and we were very far from being wealthy.
Yeah, that's a big one, right? People put all kinds of things on us depending on what we look like and what our identities are, for sure.
Thank you, Rachel.
Rachel, it's funny you said that, because one of the stereotypes about people who are Jewish is that they are wealthy. And I was thinking of that one. I didn't grow up in a trailer park, but I'm very middle class.
Mhm. Thank you, Robin.
I grew up as part of an immigrant family, and I'll just kind of share, I've had pretty interesting experiences in that realm. My mother grew up my mother is one of 12, Irish Catholic, if you couldn't guess. And they, so she grew up with 14 people in like a 1 or 2 bedroom house in the Bronx. I think what's interesting about that is so she grew up very poor. We grew up pretty middle class comparatively, but my father passed away when we were very young, and my mom probably never made more than $30,000 in her life, and was raising 3 girls. So she on her own. So what I found interesting about that is that oftentimes my very recent immigrant family, like last 100 years comparative to many, is probably some of the hardest to crack in terms of this, in terms of some of these conversations, because they like to think, well, we did live the American dream. We pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps. My mom's like, now I have 3 girls who are, 2 of my sisters have PhDs. I have a master's degree, and so if we can do it, why can't other people do it? And so it's interesting. And it's been a source of a lot of hard conversation where I said, yeah, you definitely didn't have it easy. Nobody said you had it easy, but was your life harder because you were a white person? And she's like, right. And I'm like, right. So it was harder because your dad had an Irish accent at the time. It was harder because, you had a lot of people, and there were other forms of discrimination. There's classism for sure, right? Classism is huge, but it's been interesting to have a lot of these conversations. And so I actually want to pull out one part of our conversation right before this about racism too, and just, we deal with this in our guide. We talk about it in our guide quite a bit. How many of you, by show of hands, whether physical or using your button, how many of you would consider yourselves to be prejudiced? Thank you, honest people. Yes, that is the right answer. You are all prejudiced. We are all prejudiced, because what the root of the word prejudice means, we're prejudging people. And that's just simply means that we only have so many neural pathways. We have to make a lot of shortcuts. Our brain makes a lot of shortcuts and makes a lot of assumptions all the time, right? There's nothing wrong with prejudging someone per se, but when those prejudices become stereotypes that are perpetuated by people in power to subjugate other people, that is when prejudices become stereotypes, then become discrimination, right? So I do want to kind of be clear about some of the linkages between some of these different terms, because one of the really important things, I think, especially in working with white people, is to get them to acknowledge the prejudices that we have, because none of us grew up separate from the white supremacist system in which we live, right? So we grew up seeing, if you saw a picture of a rapist on the media, you were Black men were far overrepresented in that category on the media, right? So even though statistically speaking, I'm far more likely to get married, to get raped by my white friend that I know, when I turn on the TV and I see a rapist, it is much more likely still to this day that I'm going to see a Black man on the television. Angela Davis goes into all kinds of detail about why that is. So, you know, there's a lot of honesty that has to happen here. I remember reading Angela Davis in my early 20s and having to admit to myself at one point when I was walking in DC, I was living in DC at the time, highly segregated city. And when I turned around and saw a Black man behind me instead of a white and not a white man, I was more nervous, and I had to admit that to myself. And then I had to dig into that and say, why am I more nervous because there's a Black man behind me? Is it because realistically, statistically, there's like any truth in that? Or is it because that's how I've been socialized and that's what I've been socialized to see? And for so many people, that's not even a conscious, you know, process or thought process yet. So, you know, to be able to have these kind of honest conversations is really important with ourselves, with our young people. And so one of the nervier, more nerve-wracking activities that we do is that we'll describe in our session 3 is that we actually have the kids guess something about us. So we put ourselves out there, and I say, you know, before they know us really well, we have a facilitator say, okay, you know, what kind of music do I listen to? Okay, who do I date? You know, do I know how to dance? What do I dance to? And usually choose things that are not going to fall into the stereotypes, you know, on purpose. And the point isn't, you know, the point is they have ideas, right? So they have ideas. They are usually can easily answer questions. No, miss, you don't, blah, 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 blah. No, miss, you don't know how to dance. You're married, you have kids, you whatever any of the, you know, different things are. And then I go through, I usually ask about 10 questions, and then I tell them how many they got right. They're usually batting like 20% right, maybe on a good day. But that's not the point, right? The point is, you have ideas about me. That's okay. It's when we combine those with biases and power that they start to become highly problematic. And that's when we need to start deconstructing and unlearning the things that we've learned, right? So any questions about that, or anybody else who wanted to share a stereotype? I'm happy to let you. If you don't, it's kind of a personal question to be asking, you know, a new group of folks. So I also understand and can keep moving on. Okay. All right, let me go back out. I don't know why this is always so clunky, going back out, back in, resharing. Let's see. Okay, so thank you very much for sharing your stereotypes. Now what we are going to chat about is, so this is another slide I'm going to spend a minute on because it takes a minute to go over. So I mentioned we have had this framework, this guide, this program. We've said we have 3 cohorts. They've each been done a little differently, anywhere from a 7-week program to a 12-week program. For some programs, they were meeting for a longer amount of time, once a week. And our summer program was pretty condensed to 7 weeks. I feel pretty strongly that it should be about a 12-week program. You'll see that I only have 10 of the sessions listed here. The 11th session is a recap of all the knowledge, and then the 12th session is a showcase. And so we'll talk about both of those things. I mean, a recap's pretty self-explanatory, but I just kind of want to talk to you about what's our theory of change and movement here. And it's imperfect. And it's some of these things kind of flow together, but what you'll see, can you see my cursor when I'm moving it around a little bit? Okay, thank you. So we kind of start with the personal and trust building. You need to build trust with these young people. Of course, that's a really important part of this program. So we do our trust building in our collective agreements. We talk about their own identities, and most of us hold some identities in which we're privileged and some identities in which we're targeted. So really starting to understand what's the relationship there and how you can use the way you felt as a targeted identity to better understand somebody else's targeted identity, et cetera. It's kind of part of the conversation. And then we start getting into that idea of social identity, privilege, power, prejudice, microaggressions. Then we start getting into sort of the group norms. So I'll say culture and cultural appropriation is always a juicy one. So it's also a hard one. I'm just gonna forewarn you, you need to do your homework on culture and cultural appropriation, because there's a lot of context there that has to inform your conversation. But the young people really enjoy discussing that. Then we talk about structural oppression. So we're still talking about group, we're going from our personal identities to our group identities here, right? Then by the end of the program, we're really trying to get towards the actions and the tools. So we talk about movements. What movements have happened historically? What strategies have they used? Why have they worked and why have they not worked? Usually it's not just in the tactics themselves. I just finished a book about Martin Luther King and the Poor People's Campaign that he had been, building right before he was assassinated, and how that happened in June. It's kind of a forgotten part of our history. And it was been pretty maligned. And, talks a lot about how much the FBI targeted and J. Edgar Hoover targeted MLK. It's part of history you don't hear too much about. People want to just act like he's a national hero, but, a lot of in his time and age, a lot of his, he was not very popular at all times, despite his amazing oratory skills and commitment to nonviolence and all the amazing things that he did and represented. So, it's very easy to be looking backward and talking about how amazing someone is, but realistically, there was, a lot of resistance there. So, sometimes the movements didn't do well, not because they weren't well organized or that people didn't put a lot of heart into them. It's because they were squashed. So anyway, we get into movements, historical as well as current movements. For that, I mentioned my colleague in Maryland, and Dr. Naya Amani Fields, I'm remembering now. She wrote an amazing she participated in this just-in-time equity dialogues for 4-H, and she also has her own curriculum out that she co-created. So we definitely pull on some of the amazing work that's been done by our colleagues. I really like session 9 as a community panel. That's a way to bring in your local community and who they're working with. So when our college students did it, they pulled in a lot of their college peers and their groups and activities, and they had a panel with them. When we did it, we had one that was about people who were underrepresented in the fields that they were working in. And then also you can just have one of, how are you acting for change? We had one where we had a filmmaker, someone who's part of the Surge, Standing Up for Racial Justice, which is a white ally group, and another person who's been really involved at the grassroots level to talk to our young people about what have been their failures, what have been their achievements within this work. And then the 10th is some really concrete tools. This is by an amazing organization called Hollaback that targets or that addresses street harassment. So they have put together a really great ideas about bystander intervention when you see somebody's being targeted. And what I really love about them, and I'm gonna bring up the guide and also hopefully see you all for a second, because I really feel out on an island when I can't see anybody. But Hollaback does this really great stuff that they give you the tools for not always having to, people feel like the only way, we have all these TikTok videos and everything else at this point that see people like rushing up and saying the exact perfect thing at the exact perfect moment, or doing like a really sick burn, after somebody says something ridiculous. And like, the reality is most of us, that's not going to be what happens, right? We're going to be like, oh God, stop doing that, or something, so what it does is give you 5 tools and say you have to be the perfect hero, in a situation. And frankly, sometimes that's not a great idea or a safe idea. So it gives 5 different Ds of you can distract, you can delegate, goes into all these 5 Ds. So I wanted to bring up the guide because that's what I hope maybe you will consider taking a deeper look at and maybe using to facilitate your own conversations in your own programs at some point. But I want to look at, kind of walk you through what this facilitated guide looks like. Just one lesson we're probably going to look at, just so you have an idea. And there are some really important caveats here I want to share.
Melanie, can I jump in for
Yes,
one
please
quick
do.
second?
Yeah.
The last slide that you showed, you will notice a part that I think is really instrumental in facilitating these 10 sessions is there's the personal part. So you'll see the first 3 sections, we really engage the youth in, the personal part, the trust building. If you worked in youth development, you understand. They could care less about what you're saying if they don't trust you, they don't feel comfortable with you, So this is a really important part of planning and using this framework. You know, I know that I'm not trying to, you know, dictate what you do, but those arrows on the side are key. The first part is personal. And then we did some group work. We made sure that each one of them understood the subject matter and really engaged them in some group work. We're going to do a little bit of group work before. We only have a few, what we have right now. We're at 204, but we want to engage you in some really good group work examples so that you can use these tools without ever having to leave your home if you don't need to, because we know that COVID is still here. But the last one is the action steps, right? Creating community panels, creating things that you can utilize as you move forward, and also will be really instrumental in the success of your program, you know, using these action tools. So those three things: personal, group, and your action tools. So thank you, Melanie. I just wanted to make sure that they understood what that was and how they were broken down.
Yes, solid points. So I did want to mention, this is a living guide. I really took this right from my colleague, Deanna, who said it beautifully, where she said this, you know, I'm going to just say this guide's never going to be perfect or complete. Notice it doesn't have like nice graphics. At some point we may get a little bit nicer graphics, but why is that? So Deanna said it best in saying there are many voices that may not be in it yet, and there's still room, that everything is emergent, and it's important because there's a lot that is emerging in these important times, and that no one has all the answers, but we must offer our actions and our efforts. I will speak as a white person right now and say I have made many, many missteps. There is no way to be perfect growing up white and speaking about race in this country. And I have been granted a lot of grace when I've made a misstep. And, you know, it's about building trusting relationships with your colleagues who, if you say something that is not well thought out, or if you say something that could be harmful, that they're going to share with you that you've said something that you need to consider more. So I think it's really important to understand that that's not an excuse for inaction, especially as white folks. So anyway, this has a little bit of context here and about the program and some of the key things you should be considering. Also has lots of linkages. And again, this is going to be like kind of open source, changing, dynamic. Again, living guide, it's going to be imperfect. I've done my best to not have typos, but who knows, could happen. So let's look at one of the, let's go to like session, I don't know, the privilege one, right, that we talked about. So what you'll see when you look at our guide, every single session has these learning outcomes, which tells you what you should be expecting to learn by the end of the session. This can also be really useful in making your evaluations at the end. Then usually there's some sort of welcoming and opening question. Our colleague Juan Carlos, who we were working with, was really great and instrumental in talking about the importance of some sort of grounding activity. So really bringing folks into the room. Often we were meeting at night after school, after a bunch of things were going on in the middle of a pandemic. So finding some way to really bring people into the room and help them center. I'll also be clear, I'm not, although I practice yoga and meditation, and it does amazing stuff for me, I'm not a great facilitator of those things. So there's plenty of resources that are offered, and we have it in the guide somewhere that you can look up online to help you to do that kind of activity if it's not your jam or it's not something you're particularly good at. So then within this activity, this is the get to know your facilitator game. So it's the one that I described. So, you know, asking people all these different questions, or whatever questions are going to help to maybe bring up some stereotypes they might have about you. And then using that for the debrief questions of where do we get our ideas? How does privilege relate to these identities we discussed? One that I think is an interesting and important one is, what is white culture? So often this is kind of considered to be, you know, the norm. So we talk about grocery stores having an ethnic aisle for anything other than quote unquote American food. I mean, so a lot of interesting conversations there. Then it talks about some different breakout rooms. So I will say this guide is set up to be a virtual program, but certainly there's plenty of applications and things that could work in an in-person program as well. You just need to think about it a little bit. And something that we're probably gonna be thinking about more, as hopefully maybe we'll be able to encourage some folks to do some in-person cohorts. And then by the end, usually at every session, so there's this timestamp again. So this is set up to be about an hour and a half session. there's nothing very rigid about this curriculum. It's for you to take and use as a jumping off point, but it's usually good to end with some sort of closing, and it helps to give you a real-time assessment of how youth are interacting with your program. So I wish, I wonder, right? So I wish, that's usually a good way to get at, like, what's not happening in this program that the kids might want to be doing, right? So asking them to kind of put that in the chat box as you're leaving. So, and again, then we have some facilitator and youth advisory notes that have come up in our conversations as we've run these guides. So that's basically the way that every single session is set up. We're at about a 24, page document, but certainly could go any different kind of way to you can go a little shorter, you can go a little longer, you can collapse some sessions. It's not rigid. It's meant as a framework, and it's meant as something for you all to be able to work from. So, okay, I'm headed back. Does anyone have any questions on the guide itself? I think I'm still talking, Malinda, so I'm still talking on the next.
Yes, you are.
I will keep talking and say some considerations in developing your cohort. These were not, oops, let's go backwards. Okay. They weren't all supposed to come up at the same time. Sorry, that's too many words at a time. They were supposed to be animated in, so my apologies. But some considerations, again, my vision is that you all are going to get out there and run your own cohorts, because we all need to be having these conversations, and we all can be equipped to have these conversations. So I will say you should do your best to not, I probably wouldn't encourage accepting applications from anything more than 15 or so youth. I think 12 is an ideal cohort size. Your facilitators should be as reflective as possible of the youth identities within the room, at least racially speaking. So do your best. It's time to reach out across an aisle and ask if somebody's willing to work with you. That is best case scenario, not always possible, but I'm certainly hoping that we can create some sort of a network that maybe somebody could say, hey, I'd love to work with somebody. Is there anybody who'd be willing to facilitate with me? I think voluntary participation is important at this point. It hasn't been given an enormous amount of consideration, but I do think our young people need to be willing to engage in the work. I think if they were super resistant, you could end up having more harm than good done, especially if you have minoritized groups in your midst. So I do think having it be voluntary is a fairly important component in this program and in the value of the program. I've spoken a bit about the timeline and the format. So it's set up as a 12-week program in our guide, but it's been done 3 different times in 3 very different ways. So there's lots of flexibility there. I also said, maybe you'd want to run 2 sessions a week, and then it would be a 6-week program. I think there's plenty of ways to do this program. I always consider, youth sports seasons and things like that, and what you might be competing with. By far, our least well-recruited program was in the summer, which is unfortunate because we had our Cornell students running it, but putting it all in context, it was summer. It was like a very brief period where things were feeling somewhat safe from a pandemic perspective. It was very hard to get youth to want to participate in a virtual program at that particular juncture. So in terms of resources and budget, like I said, we worked first with a $5,000 budget for our first cohort, and then a $25,000 budget for this last year. A lot of that has just gone to our staff time. We bought the youth hoodies always, just to give them some sense of shared identity. Hoodies are not inexpensive. They also come with some meaning, speaking of Trayvon Martin. So the youth always wanted to do hoodies, and each one had their own separate design. So we have 3 different beautiful hoodies associated, which are expensive, but nothing crazy. And then we sometimes got some help in editing the videos. But again, this is not something that you need an enormous budget to do. I think that's what I want to be most clear about. You need to have somebody who's willing to dedicate their time. And beyond that, the hard costs are very minimal. I would recommend the hoodie. And then I would also maybe recommend some sort of, if you end up doing a video, some sort of, person to help you out with that if you need that. For us, key partners were, we worked with the Program for Research on Youth Development and Engagement. Unfortunately, the acronym is PRIDE. It doesn't make a lot of sense at Cornell, but can't change their acronym. They're a wonderful partner despite their acronym. It's like, get another acronym. So, and then we also worked with the Office of Engaged Initiatives within Cornell to really partner with faculty and other folks who were constantly being asked to look at our guide, make sure that it's grounded in good research, good resources, et cetera. And so those have been really key partners in recruiting, and they also help secure our interns for the summer to run the program. I've talked about the community panel and grounding it in resources that are available in your local communities. I also want to just take a moment to share how impressed I've been with our 25 youth graduates. I know of at least 4 of those graduates that have gone on to start their own anti-racism groups in their own communities after doing this program. And that was not ever an explicit or stated goal of this program. So I had one young lady in the first group, the white woman in the video, who was in a very conservative, very white neighborhood around us, who went in to run her own program at the local library. She really thought her community needed to be doing that work. So she partnered with the local librarian. Another young person in the summer did the same thing, partnered with her local librarian. And it's another very white, very conservative community, and they're diving into books about the Black experience because there's so little diversity in their community. And then 2 other young people who have started their own anti-racism groups. So this program has been a jumping off point for people to go and do their own work, and that's really important. And then finally, we do like grounding the experience in a showcase. You've seen a lot of videos here, but it doesn't have to be a video. Our summer cohort did their own presentations about what actions they'd be taking after this program. So it wasn't, we have a video of their panel, but really what they did was present about what they were planning to do moving forward. You could have it be a dance video. You could have it be that youth are interviewing other youth for a video project. We give you a lot of different ideas in the guide about what the final showcase would look like, but we do think it's important to ground the experience in that final showcase so that youth are working towards something and feel grounded in that throughout the course of the 12 or however many week program. Okay, over to you, Malinda.
Okay, I just want to reiterate, because Melanie did cover quite a bit of how we went through what it is, we went through why Act for Change is important. Now we're going to talk about how we and you, because we're going to continue this work with youth, and we're inviting you guys to now take on this mantle and this, tour or social justice movement, whatever you like to call it, and move it forward. So how can we use Act for Change? We have a curriculum. We, at the end of this session today, you will get our information. If you want to deep dive, if you want to deep further into what this program is, you want to really look over the guidelines, you want to see if your community fits. I will let you know, I work in Sullivan County now, but I am an Orange County resident. I'm right here with you, Robin. I'm in Newburgh, and I know a lot of youth here. I'm affiliated with a number of youth organizations here. This community would really benefit with my assessment of a program like Act for Change. So with that said, I'll let you know that Stand for Change was developed through Newburgh Free Academy West, the West Campus. So what I'd like to do is how to do this. How do you even get started with this? The first thing is contact Melanie or I. We can kind of give you different pointers. But one thing I really want to emphasize outside of what she just said, going through that process, is that one key component to the success of our pilot program is that we connected with a school partner. Now, if you're in youth development, we know how difficult that is if you don't know someone that you could just pick up the phone and call. But I would suggest that you connect with a school partner. If you know teachers, counselors, principals, anyone you may know at your school level, board members, introduce the program. We will provide you with the tools, we'll provide you with the framework, If you need some consultation, we can do that as well as to what really worked and what really didn't work. Maybe throw some ideas back and forth as to enhance the program. But the one key component in your recruitment process is really connecting with those that are connected with youth and that really, really, really feel the need to bring this type of program to your community. I will say you will not, and I think I can say this with confidence and a sign off for Melanie, is that the young people, they're not it. They're not the problem. The kids, they loved it. They loved having this open and honest conversation. Did we find a challenge when it came to getting on Zoom? Not really, but yes, right? And when I say that, when I say yes, you'll find that, you know, if you've been dealing with youth on Zoom now, there is some Zoom etiquette that you may have to cover, because a lot of our sessions were like this. You know, you see the ceiling, you know, people not turning on their cameras, but just going through that first process, as I was talking about, the personal process, go through that with them. Let them know that they're in a safe space, engaging them in the conversation, finding out how they're feeling today. That personal component is really, really big when developing this type of program, making connection in the school. And then be sure to engage the parents. I'm not going to say that's an easy thing. Youth development, we know that parents are busy. They're running all over. And if they have multiple children, they're even busier. So we want to make sure that going through what Melanie just said, we want to make sure that if you're going to implement this program within your community, within your school, within some of your social groups, that you really, really look at the recruitment process and engage us in that conversation. Let's talk about that and understand. Bye, Kim. Thank you for joining us today. It looks like Kim has to leave, but in engaging them in that process and making sure that they understand. Parents, if we have to develop some type of write-up to understand that we're not teaching racism. You know, it's been a big conversation about the critical race theory, and you know, we're teaching racism, and you know, sometimes parents just need you to hold their hands through the process, and we can develop things that help them understand that this is important to the health and well-being of their children as they move forward. So I just wanted to reemphasize a couple of things that Melanie said. We talked about our group size. We talked about this being a voluntary process. I do not, and I will reemphasize this from what Melanie said, this is not a program that anyone should be made to attend. And I want to say that again, because we developed a number of youth programs in our past where you have to come to get this, and you gotta come. I don't believe that this program is conducive for that at this time, because you're going to be discussing you're going to be engaged in conversations that are not always comfortable. And you want the students to be very, very comfortable. I called one of our students a rock star, and her name was Oluchi from Nassau County, because she really does understand the importance. And after going through the program, a few of our youth have now taken on the responsibility to act for change, to really not just stand up, but now they're getting ready to act for change. So let us know at the end if you would like to, you know, access these tools that we have available for you to run a program like this. Melanie?
I have a question. I
Yes.
just want to, what age group do you recommend this for?
Great question. We have worked with 13 plus. I actually think like incoming 8th graders would be a really good one. They're usually still not too cool for school as high schoolers. They're not like doing way too many things, which I often find by their junior or senior year they are. We had a mix. We had a good mix. In our second group, we had, I think, anywhere from 13 to 17 or 18-year-olds. We had a couple seniors. There, it was just kind of a good reminder that age makes like 1 year of difference makes a really big difference, you know, you forget how much in high school, like 1 year of difference, like makes a difference in terms of like how they look at each other and how many, you know, like it's a really big deal to be a sophomore or a junior. So I feel like I got reminded of that a couple of times, and then maybe could think about that a little bit more consciously. Like maybe you do find ways to give the seniors a little bit more responsibility, or like maybe they're mentoring the 13-year-olds or something, and you're just kind of like setting up some more dynamics that may happen organically anyway. But it wasn't, they all connected, whether they were 13 or 14 or 18. So we had some pretty good mixes. 13 might be a little young. It does depend on the maturity, you know, and there's a lot of considerations there too.
We do a summertime youth leadership academy, and I think that this would be a good outgrowth. Like then those kids are invited to become part of our youth advisory board. And I think that this would be I'm trying to figure it out how, but I think it, you know, another subset might be for this, you know, those kids who want to be involved. So so thanks for the age group.
No, that's great. That's a great question. Yeah, Robin.
I wanted to ask you how adaptable you think this is to college age youth, because our school, as so many, are grappling with these issues too, and starting to want to begin these conversations among our students at what is admittedly a predominantly white institution, but we do have some diverse students that attend as well. So apparently, I heard through the grapevine that there were some of the RAs were trying to run programs, but didn't have the adequate training or knowledge, or maybe hadn't done the work on their own. Could we adapt this material and bring it into the college? And could we draw upon you for that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
And some
Robin,
of the
I'm right here. If you need to access, you know, if you need me to come over there, I'm not even far. I can walk to Mount St. Mary's College. And
I mean, look, I have my little role in the Career Center, so I have these big ideas of what I can do within my little role, but I try to spread and share. I'm on the DEI committee, so because of that work, I know what kinds of conversations we're having, but I could certainly bring this back to our student activities and our residents' life organizations who would be really primarily responsible for that.
That would be great.
So
and given I just want to be a clear reminder, we're about 3 minutes in. We're going to skip a couple of things so that we can begin to take some questions and answer, because I'm sure there's a number of questions. Thank you, Robin, for that. And we really will be available. You know, our information's at the very end. I'll make sure I put it in the chat box for everyone in case you want to really talk in more depth about our programming and how we can set it up and how we can customize it to fit your area.
And I'll also say college students have facilitated the program. So that's another idea. I mean, you definitely learn by facilitating as well. So especially, if RAs wanted to facilitate it, but many of the resources were actually recommended by college students. So I would also say that I don't even think you'd have to do that much tweaking. I think if anything, if you started with a group of 13-year-olds that hadn't had much exposure to the topics or to the material, you might have to do even more. You'd probably have to do a lot more customizing than you would with a group of college students, in my opinion. So I think, I'm going to put up, Malinda, do you want to stick, just as I don't think we're gonna have time to do it, but I do think maybe just talking about the Jamboard as like a final kind of little eval for us, as well as the actual formal eval would be great. And then I will pull up the screen, but we do have 2 more minutes for questions for anybody. And I also want to say, as a concrete call to action, I'm planning on offering at least a 9-week sort of train the trainer series, 1 hour every week. Every session will be covered and we'll have conversations around it. So I'm kind of planning that probably for February and March. I'm going to send out a doodle poll. we presented this at this point with my state level colleagues here in New York, also with some national colleagues. So in Memphis last month, people from 10 different states were there and talking about running their own cohorts. And then we're looking to do at least one of their community training as well as this one. So like I said, I have a lofty vision of a lot of people running these kind of cohorts and supporting each other, and maybe even finding ways to combine when we might need more facilitators from one area, like, or maybe even get to pair with somebody out in Colorado or something who wants to be doing, or California who wants to be doing this work. So I really want to find a way to support this. So you can also, if you're interested in actually facilitating something, look for some sort of doodle poll or something about when would be a good time. Like it'll be like Wednesdays at 2 or something. And then I can try to figure out how I could support this work moving forward too.
I just had a burst of excitement thinking about Colorado running an anti-racism program. Yeah, that would be really cool. And the youth being youth-led, especially, right? All right, so are there any more questions? Because you can begin to ask those questions I wanted to show you one activity that we use. Annie, please don't forget to complete. Okay, so there's a survey you need to complete. Annie just put the link inside of the chat box. Also, there's another link. I think I sent it, right? Did I send it? Yes. There's a link that I just sent. It has our Jamboard. And on that Jamboard, I'm going to share as to what it looks like. I don't know how many of you have ever used the Jamboard first, just to raise a hand. Anybody? Nobody. Okay, so this is a really cool activity that you can utilize. There's many of them. We had another one, but I wanted to show you guys as an example of how you can engage youth in some really cool activities while they're on Zoom. So this is for the basis of Zoom. So basically, really quick, because we know we're running out of time. If you go to the link, you can have real-time activity within this. What I want to show you is the first question, act for change. What can I personally do? As you can see, there's a little sticky note here. If you go over here, if you can see my mouse, go over here to this sticky note, click it on, and then put whatever you want in this note. You hit save, and the note comes up on the board. You can use different colors. You can use different colors. You can use any color you want. And it'll automatically go up on the board. So let's try. Everybody go to the link, come over and grab your sticky note, write whatever you want in the message. You can answer this question. What can I personally do? What can I personally do to act for change? I'm gonna delete and it should come up. Melanie, are you in?
Yep, I'm on it.
Educate myself. I can bring this information to my college and get some groups going on campus. Love it, love it, love it, love it. Then we have begin to have conversations with our elementary students. Okay, perfect. I'm gonna go to another board, which I have Act for Change. What can my program team community do? There's one sticky in here, identify partners. Grab a sticky, put your note in, and put it on our board. These are just really cool interactive things you can do as a facilitator with you that engage them personally, and they'll become part of the process.
Wonderful.
They love it. Just to change it up so that it's not boring. What can my program team community do? Grab the parents, right? Yep. And the last one, for to be in respect of everyone's time, what support do I need to do anti-racism programming with you? Now, with respect to your time, you're more than welcome to participate. And again, I want to put in the chat box our information where we can be contacted.
I can bring it up to Malinda. Are you all seeing?
Okay, great.
Is
If
that?
you want to participate, you can put your note in. And Melanie's going to put our information in the chat box. And
Yep.
we want to thank you again so much for joining us today, for being part of this conference. Please remember to fill out the questionnaire and contact us. We're here. We're here so you can. Thank you, Rachel. Please contact us. That's our information right there. We're both at Cornell University. We can be contacted. We'll forward any tools necessary, consultation. We'll ask and invite you to join us in some pilot groups that you may be interested in developing. And you guys unmute yourself and ask any questions. We're gonna hang on for a few more minutes if you'd like. And thank you again. And I believe that comes from the top two here for being a part of this conference and this being the end of our conference today. We appreciate you. We thank you for taking on this work. This is important work as we move forward together in a more unified and a belonging environment. And that's what we're encouraging in this anti-racism program. So thank you. Thank you all for really joining. Thank you, Sheena. Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Nicole, Rachel, Annie. Thank you for facilitating for us. And Robin, of course, thank you as well. So thank you all. If you have any questions, please stay.
I have a little bit I have to add to this. Just thank you both for the great workshop. It was really fabulous. I really gained a lot myself. So before you go, make sure you do the survey, please. That's really helpful for us. And I put the link in there in the chat. So I also would like to remind you of next year's Growing Resilience webinar that takes place every second Thursday of the month from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. Except for February when it will be the first Thursday. From January to May. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers, including Dr. Ken Ginsberg, who is an internationally known expert in the field of youth and resilience. And thank you all again for joining us with, so please put that in your schedules and hope to see you soon, all of you.
Yes.
I'll be in touch, guys.
I did want to say really quick, for those of you that haven't been part of our conference and you haven't seen, I think this will be an opportunity to really showcase how Act for Change culminated. And if you would stay on for a few more minutes, a video was created by our wonderful students. If you haven't seen it yet, I know the first conference, the keynote speaker video didn't work. And if you've been throughout the conference, you'll just see it again. But I would like to invite you to hang on for a few more minutes.
Malinda, I'm so sorry, but I have to go. So I made you the host.
Okay,
I will. Second now. So I really hope to see some of you again. Bye-bye.
Okay, so I don't know if you guys have seen this, but I think it really showcases the work that our youth have done. And I hope you enjoy. Can you see my screen? Thumbs up?
Yes.
I'm gonna share my sound. And let's see, hopefully it'll play.
This is a coordinated activity happening across this nation. And so we are in a state of emergency. Black people are dying in a state of emergency. We cannot look at this as an isolated incident.
Oops.
After the Act for Change program, I'm planning to do a community service project which involves racial healing after systemic oppression, such as redlining, which was a discriminatory practice against Black communities, and environmental justice.
So I was asked the question of what's next for me. I know we were given opportunities to go again in another Act for Change or another racism thing. I'd love to do that, you know. I'd love to just spread awareness about this. And hopefully next year, I want to apply to Cornell too. So it's like, literally, this has been such a dream, and it's just really amazing to see what, you know, teenagers and the youth can do just for awareness and just for our communities, you know. I think it's important that we all know that, you know, that racism does exist and we can change it, you know, no matter how young you are, you can do anything. So I hope that everybody realizes that. So I hope that answered the question.
I learned many different things from the Act for Change anti-racism program, but I think some of the most important things I learned were the many different ways and shapes that racism takes, and also how to effectively combat it through the use of mass movements and individual action. After this program, I'm going to continue my work in anti-racism leadership by trying to get more involved at a local level so that hopefully I can create change that takes us one step closer to ending racism.
This is that jam board I was talking about.
Over the course of the Act for Change program, I've learned just how deep racism goes and how many things it affects. There are so many parts of our system that is built on racism and slavery, but now it's time to take action. It's time to use our knowledge on how to interact with situations where someone's being harassed and how to create a movement to help others educate themselves on their personal biases, and most importantly, uplift POC voices and stories, raising awareness for the current movements that are already happening all across the nation. I've learned how important it is to act for change.
Hi, I'm Olivia Kelly, and one thing that I learned from the Act for Change program is that a big impact can be made if a lot of people come together and stick together and work together. And one thing that I'm going to continue doing after the Act for Change program ends is advocating for racial equality on the Instagram account. And I encourage others to continue posting on there as well and taking part in that.
So it's not much left after that, but I did want to share with you guys this culminating event because it was so interesting. This is, I'll just the very end.
And be able to use it in everyday life, which I have been using, and I just want to like use my knowledge and be able to share my knowledge and be able to persuade people that racism is real and racism is still happening after all these years. And people might not believe me, but after these programs, I just think like I can change the world. So after like doing these, I want to be able to put my knowledge, put my time into making sure we all live happy and free.
So that is the culminating event. That is the finale, the showcase, whatever you want to call the end of your program. These kids did a phenomenal job. We did bring in a videographer. We did bring in someone that helped with pulling that together. So that was something that you would want to put in your budget. Melanie and I can take you through a budget process to see what you can afford. If you can't afford a sweatshirt, I'm doing a program now where we're putting together a journal, and it's based on a Martin Luther King speech, and it's a Martin Luther King program in Hurleyville, New York. So again, I'm gonna stay on. I wanna thank you guys for that 15 extra minutes to view the video that we showed, because that is our culminating event. So thank you. Thank you, Annie, too, for your support today. Been great. Thank you, Nicole, for showing up. I can't thank you guys enough. So if you have any questions, if you need to dig a little deeper, I'll hang on for about 2 more minutes or 3 more minutes. Let me know. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. You're welcome. Robin,
Bye.
give me a call, whatever you need.
I'm gonna share